Hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. We're going to be doing a 12-part series here where we cover everything from marketing from A to Z. So from naming your business to creating a website to hitting the market to I've been in the market for a while and I'm really good at marketing. What's next on the list? What's new and exciting that I should know about, that I should be doing for my organization? And so we're going to do that through a series of discussions with members of our team here at Hook Promotions. We've been in business since 2014, and we help organizations and businesses manage their digital profiles and and do well in a digital marketing place. When I started marketing back a few decades ago, as a marketing director, I was doing TV and radio and billboards and phone books, lots of phone books and things that don't exist anymore. And so that world is ever changing when we help organizations navigate that process. Sarah Gordy is here with us today. She's our director of sales. And she is the boots on the ground that helps organizations navigate this stuff every single day. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So you're the boots on the ground, and you hear from a lot of organizations who are at different levels. Not everybody comes knowing exactly what they want to do. So I think there's probably just a lot of questions. And I think that's maybe a good place to start. So when someone first reaches out to you and says, I want to undergo this process with maybe the professional help of a team like ours at Hooked, what are the sorts of things that they're asking?
Well, there's never just one question, but I will say this. First of all, it's a really exciting time for that organization, for the people in it, either starting a business or growing it to a point where they're looking at changing a name or updating some things, maybe updating logos, that type of thing becomes a real milestone. And so they're at a point oftentimes when they're looking at the history of who they've been and how that's gone for them from a name perspective, for instance, and figuring out that maybe there were some pitfalls. So they're starting to ask questions like, what things should we consider? How do we even think about renaming or naming our organization to begin with? Because they come in at different points in time. But so those questions can be different, but the foundation is the same, right? How do I do this without making a step that's going to create difficulty or problems in the long run? And then secondly, how do we think about this from a digital perspective? Because I think more and more people are recognizing that that's where our organizations exist. Our websites have become our front office to the world, right? So the name of a company has to exist within a digital world. And there are things to consider like, who else has that name? Who else has similar names? What other names do industry have? There's a lot of different considerations. And probably the biggest question is like, what do we even think about? How do we even start to navigate all of the world around it?
I think we hear a lot like, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yes.
Like I didn't know I should really be focusing on that or should consider that.
Yeah.
And I think that, because we do this a lot, it's not our first rodeo. And so there's just things that, you encounter along the way and you grow, you just make it easier.
Yeah.
But why is like a name the first thing somebody would start with, when they're looking at their identity?
Well, sometimes we think about, it could be a name that, for instance, could be your surname, like Heike's Hooked Promotions.
Coincidentally, right?
Coincidentally. Alliterations can be fun. And then I think it depends on the industry. If you're in a restaurant business, the considerations of a name are very different than if you're starting a yoga studio. You're trying to elicit different feelings. But at the end of the day, and we talk about this a lot in our business, it's about the emotion, right? And about empathy. And people don't think of a name of an organization as being empathetic, but it really can elicit feeling, which means it can be.
Yeah, that was an excellent segue to kind of how I want to maybe quantify this a little bit. Because I think, like, first of all, there's no silver bullets. It's so, the world is not black and white. And like you said, it varies by industry, right? Or it might vary by state or culture, or if you're a multinational company, right? And so, yeah, just have things that you have to be aware of along the way. I think different points in time, there's all brands and things that exist at certain points in time that later you go, huh? And so I think one of them that kind of comes to mind for me is the iPad. I'm dating myself by this, but when that came out, I remember like it was like Good Morning America or the Today Show, and all the hosts are sitting around in a circle and they're laughing at the name because it reminds them of a feminine hygiene product. And here now, like you wouldn't even consider that, because iPad is the lingo now, it's the
Yeah.
vernacular.
Yeah. Not everybody gets the benefit of being the top of their industry, however.
Yeah, I mean, but they were the topic of national news with it, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so that was they got a lot of press from that too. So that's something to
Yeah.
consider. Um, I think though you touched on a couple things that I just want to say might be like good, like starting points or ways to like focus on as you're looking at it. And I think number one is I think we always think about like we want to represent ourselves, right, with our organization. Like, here's my drive, here's my passion for it.
Mhm.
And not every organization has that. Sometimes it's like, well, I just kind of inherited this, or here's where I am at, and whatnot, or here's who I represent at this point in time. But I think when we talk about logo design a lot, and we'll get to that the next episode, but I always talk about like, it doesn't matter if it's the owner's favorite color, it's not about them. At the end of the day, it is, and we can talk about how I named Hook because it started with a list of all the things that we wanted to be. But at the end of the day, it's your audience who is receiving that. And you talked about like, a yoga studio called Calm. You know what I mean? A gym that's called height. You want those things to match, and they say a lot, and that can be a good starting point. Not necessarily like those are the names of your business, but those are all the things that are maybe related to or that you want to exude. And I think that gives people something tangible that you can do is just start making lists of things like that.
Yeah.
But I think like who does your audience want you to be?
Right. Oh, it's really true. And it's important to recognize that in every industry, there are kind of standards, and then there's a way to get outside that standard box, right? So one of the things that I think is really cool about what our team does when we help an organization is that we do this research and we're able to come back to them and say, here are the organizations in our region or in the region you exist in that are in the same industry and the types of names that they have so that we can start to say we want to be unique, but we don't want to stick out like a sore thumb either. We don't want it to be weird, but we don't want it to be the same as everybody else.
You want your kid to have a great name, but you don't want them to be bullied for it.
Exactly. Same concept, exactly.
Yeah, that's really true. I think, there's a couple other pathways, so like, what are things that your audience wants you to be? I think there's also things that are just thoughtful or relevant,
Yeah.
right? Like, and we also know one of the things that comes to mind for me is when we raised money for the park in downtown Chippewa Falls. That is now a park. For years it was not. It was an industrial site. And so it was a big transformation. And when I sat on the marketing committee for that, and we came up with the name The Current Campaign because of the river and its current and what that brings with it, and the fact that current brings kind of new life and all of that, and it just really made sense. So it was really relevant because that's what you saw even when you looked at the project in place.
Well, then it has multiple
So
meetings. It's also
what
the
is
here
that?
and it has multiple meetings. It's also the here and now.
Yeah,
What are we doing
exactly.
now, right now for our community? So I think it was strong in both those ways.
Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
thought of it.
You're my boss. I have to say those things.
No, it's funny because there's a room full of us and you just start throwing out words, right? And it just happens that it was one that I threw out. And we kind of did that. We kind of bounced it around and went, yeah, actually, when we think about it from different perspectives. So that's something to do too as you kind of get a
Yeah.
list started. And I think the other thing that I think is kind of another maybe shoot that people go down is like level of service. When you're
Yes.
thinking like, grand,
Elite.
that says something about you and sets an expectation, right?
Yeah.
Or superior. that means you're going to be a step above the rest. And if that's what you're aiming for and that's really accurate, I would say that would be the caveat to all of this is it has to be accurate. It can be what you aspire to be, but at the same time, it really has to match, I think, the audience experience.
For sure.
I found some information online, and I want to cite a source for this down in the notes, but there was a 2022 study with 60 million companies of all sizes worldwide. I'm guessing they were English-speaking because there's just different alphabets, right? But do you know what was the most common first letter of a business name
I
worldwide?
do.
Like all these.
I do, but I'm not going to be the spoiler.
Oh, that's right. I suppose you read my notes. It's S.
It's S.
S. And what was it? 12% of businesses' names. So of all levels, of all countries,
Yeah.
12% started with S, and that was the most, followed by A and M at 10% each.
Well, and I remember, again, to date myself, back in the day, it was AAA locks, AAA plumbing, AAA, and it was because they wanted to rank in the yellow pages.
They were first in the phone book. Oh, you're darn right. I played the phone book game for years. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
not so much a thing anymore.
No, no, but I mean, that's been replaced with, showing up
Yeah.
when somebody Googles you,
Absolutely.
either organically or, with paid assistance. And so, yeah, isn't that interesting? But yeah, what you probably already know this too, but why don't you tell everybody what the least common letter is for first names?
I think it's X. Am I remembering that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is X.
Yeah.
Not surprising.
Yeah. I mean, there aren't that many words that start with X.
Yeah, I mean, and it's hard to pronounce, right?
Yeah.
So when you think audience centric,
Is it like
it's
X
like,
or is
yeah.
it a Z, sounding? Yeah.
Yeah, they can just be tricky. So shorter isn't better. 55% of business names were over 20 letters in length. Because I think there's a lot of descriptors,
Yeah.
home interiors,
Mhm.
blank, social services. And so another 21% were 16 to 20 letters in length. So, yeah. So on the other hand, I think it's the opposite. We can provide some research maybe when we talk websites, but I think URLs shorter is better. But more and more people are just connecting to a
Or even
URL.
just a
Typing it in.
URL exists for my business.
Yeah.
I've talked with business owners who started their business and picked a name and we're talking about some of those pitfalls, right? And didn't know what they didn't know. And they've got a name where they couldn't get a matching URL. And
I
that
think
can
that's,
be frustrating. And it can be detrimental to that SEO, the ability for people to find you when they're searching. So yeah, that's one of the things that I think, even in naming, even if you're not talking websites, you still got to be talking about where is my website going to resist and reside, and
yeah.
that's an
I think
important.
that's an excellent tip. And you're absolutely right. It's like you have to doing a little research would be something maybe next level that you could do. And like searching URL, go to GoDaddy.com and just start typing it in. It'll tell you like what's available, and
Yeah.
and it might be available and be $10,000, or but usually it's not expensive and under $100, and but it's something really meaningful. And if you feel passionately about it, if you have a couple names in mind, just go buy them. You can
Yeah.
always like give them up. And so,
Right.
so if that's something that's important to you, yeah, by all means.
And
I think the other
sometimes
thing,
here's another quick pro tip. Sometimes it's important to buy URLs that are really close to yours and just park it, because you don't want a competing organization to do that. Depending, it's not always the case, but it could be.
yeah, and you can drive the traffic all to your site.
Yeah.
So if people type it in wrong,
Yeah.
they're still there. I think the other thing that I would say from a pro tip standpoint is, and it's really simple. It's not like a big pro thing. Is just Google it, search it, find out. Like you said, there's other companies. Do other companies have the same name? I'm going to ask you that one in a moment. But it might make a difference if that company is in your industry or not. If it's another car dealership, then maybe you don't want to be too close to them, or maybe you're trying to mimic them, and that's your MO. I don't know, but maybe if it's a paper manufacturer, it doesn't matter. But can businesses have the same name?
Yes and no. You still have to register legally. So within the state, you've got to, so states make a big difference from a can you have the same name question. Within the state, you have to have a unique registration for your company name. And sometimes a company is doing business as, and so there's some room there for, you know, spreading your wings a little bit. But yeah, I think it's important to go, to go to the state website that's the appropriate place and do a search there as well, because there are some constraints. But I would say if you've got a name that's repeated by another business, it doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't have that name, but I think you have to be aware of it and make that decision. Each
Yeah.
situation is unique. Is it a business that you would absolutely not want to be associated with? Do they do something that is not legit? Consider it, right? Or is there crossover from an industry perspective? And then you really want to be unique. You don't want to be the same as.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hate to say it depends, but it depends.
But something we say in house all the time is, polish their turd.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Right?
Yeah, I mean, like, take that and make it better.
Yeah.
If that's, something you wanted to do. So, yeah, I would agree. Question for you. When is like a time, because, these are things you can do on your own. When is the time to like hire a company like Hooked and go the route of like hiring professionals to handle this from you? What do you encounter as like the right time?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I would say is that it's not as expensive as you think. So, yes, is there an investment? Yeah, but we're not talking about thousands of dollars. We're talking about making a fairly modest investment on something that is going to be foundational to your organization for the long haul. Consider if you, I guess, I'm never somebody who wants to, like instill fear about stuff. But if you don't choose the right name and you get 5 years down the road and you've spent literally thousands of dollars in time and money putting business cards and letterhead and marketing and posters and brochures or whatever it is, or digital or a Facebook page or a LinkedIn page, all of those things take time and energy, and time is money. And now you're 5 years down the road and you've got a name that doesn't either represent you or is crossover that you don't like, or maybe represented where you started, but doesn't represent how you've grown. So my best advice would be do it early when you've got the brainchild. Think about it really early on. And like I said, we're not talking about thousands of dollars. We're talking about a fairly modest investment that can make all the difference for an organization getting off the ground. And then you also don't lose the investment you've made in your branding efforts, because that's a big part of a company when they're starting out. They're really branding their organization and identifying, deciding what that brand is and promoting it and creating the awareness. And you've done all that work and then change the name. So I know organizations that are like, I really wish I didn't have the name I have, but I don't want to change it now. And so
Yeah.
they feel like they're kind of stuck with it.
Well, they are stuck. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's because they are.
It can be done, but it's a matter of whether or not you want to. Yeah.
It becomes a bigger effort. It becomes a
It,
bigger boulder to move later in time,
and
like
more
all things.
expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. What's the process, and is it painful? I think, like, I hope it's fun, but what do people say to you?
I can't believe you guys think of all the things you think of. I never thought about that. When you said before, a lot of times people manage, uh, owners of organizations don't know what they don't know. I mean, that's really true. They're surprised by even some of the things you and I have talked about today. And certainly when we go into creating a name or helping an organization create a name, we go through a lot of things that are aspects that most business owners aren't going to think of because this isn't their business. What we do is not what they do. Or they do. They're finding their own name, right? So they're surprised by that, and they're surprised by all of the different aspects of that name and 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 we almost always are doing a logo along with the name. And so I know that you're going to be having a conversation, future podcast around logos, but they're very intricately
Yeah.
connected. And so when we do those projects, they're usually together, and we're usually doing all of this research that happens that allows them, when we come back, to say, here's all the information that you need to make an informed decision. But we do the heavy lifting, then we boil it down, and then we present the highlights or the lowlights, right? Or both, and make sure that they're just making an informed decision that's not overwhelming. Because I think that's a problem too, is that it's my business and I'm so passionate about the business. And now
Yeah.
I'm overwhelmed about what to do, even if I were going to consider naming it.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad those are the things you hear.
Yeah, yeah.
Before we go, I thought maybe it would be kind of cool to share, I guess, how we came up with the Hooked name. Have I ever shared that? We
No,
talked.
Lee, I would love for you to share a story about how you came up with the Hook name.
So originally, I had a partner in a business who, like very early on, right after we named and registered, had a really great opportunity and took that opportunity. And so I did it solo. But what we did is went downtown and we ordered giant beers that were like this tall. And we're like, we're going to have a name by the time we finish these. And if not, we're going to have another. And we
Could
just
we
took a
could we
legal.
just could we just qualify with this with what not to do?
Be coherent.
Be sober.
But my point is, it was a social thing. It wasn't
Yeah.
just me sitting down, like racking my brain, right? So it helps to have somebody to bounce things off of. But we just sat with a legal pad and just started, like I said, it was like 4 columns, and it was just, what are all the words that we want this, like what we're building to exude, right? We want a level of professionalism, right? We want it to kind of be next level. We want to just be helpful. We want to make it easy. Some of those things, I think, hearing you talk today, I'm like, yeah, some of those things have happened. That's kind of cool. But I mean, and it was pages and pages of words, right? And then we kind of started, okay, like what names can we get from that, and we kind of did some of the things that we talked about early on in the episode here, where we said, like, here was one path we went down where we talked audience centric things. Here's one thing where we talked level of service, right? And ultimately, we wanted to have a name that was kind of creative, being we were doing creative work, and so we came up with Hooked. And then we kind of went, well, let's do HOOKD. Sometimes people spell it with apostrophe. Every time I tell somebody my email over the phone, I have to say, no, there's no E in that. But the point is, for us, is it gives us an opportunity, because we're usually face to face with people that we're doing business with, an opportunity to like talk about our name. And also people, they get it. They look at it, and we kind of thought, like for our audience, that's what they're all looking for. They want to hook. They want to hook their audience, and we can help them do that. And so it just kind of went hand in hand, and it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, and we
Well,
went with lowercase because it was just more approachable.
yeah. I think what you're talking about there is a really good brainstorm session
Yeah,
with
and,
beer
and
in hand. That doesn't.
yeah, it worked. I mean, whatever helps, right? But I would say the thing that we did after that is we kind of picked like our top ones, right? We went through the list and then just started eliminating. No, 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 no. But you got to get it all out. You can't like hesitate. Like good, bad ideas, like you got to get them all down.
Yeah.
And then we kind of picked our favorites, and it's like, the cream kind of rises to the top. And then we just ask people who we care about, who know us, who know our level of integrity and what we want to achieve. Well, what do you think? What do you think describes this? Or, if you were somebody, in my audience, what, what would your expectation or reaction be to
Well,
this?
and it's interesting because even though you were pretty new at coming into Hooked as a business owner, with the marketing background, you inherently knew you needed to brainstorm. You needed to think about this being audience centric. You needed to think about what industry you're in and how that represents you within the industry. And incidentally, Hooked is still a unique name in the marketing industry.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. The
and
other people are fishing enthusiasts.
yeah,
So,
and you got the URL, right? Like all of the things that that we just talked about as far as some of those factors to consider and ways to go about the process are elements in your story. And I don't know if you knew that before we had this conversation. I don't think you had ironed it out to that level. But as you were telling the story, I was like, check, check, check. That's pretty
Pretty
cool.
smart.
Pretty smart.
I love it. Well, this has been really insightful. Is there anything else that you feel like would be helpful that anyone should know before we part ways?
The only other thing I would say that sometimes comes up is that you can rank or not rank on a digital platform depending on what words you use. And that's something just to be aware of, right? Like, especially if you're in the medical field somehow, or let's just say you're in the hemp or Delta 9 or any of those types of fields, there are some where it just can become difficult to get Google to admit that you exist if you choose the wrong thing. And that's
I can
important.
give a couple examples from our experience. I
Yeah.
mean, we've been doing this for a decade and a half. Weight loss,
Yes.
words you cannot say, just or in your name, you will get X'd out of everything because there's a lot of liabilities
Right.
therein. What are some of the others?
Mental health,
Addiction.
addiction services. Yeah. And Christian religious,
Yep.
whatever reason
Yep.
is,
They get flagged by an algorithm is what happens, right?
yeah.
And so
Right.
there's not a person on the other end, but it's frustrating because things get lumped in because there isn't a person on the other end. And so,
Yeah.
but there's ways to navigate that.
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons that I think there's a better outcome when you work with an organization like Hook to do that because
Yeah.
those are pitfalls that most people wouldn't know about.
Yeah. Well, this has been very fruitful. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us,
This has
Sarah.
been good time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna have next. We're gonna be have Jess, our production manager, talking about logos. So giving a visual identity to the names that we're talking about today, and yeah. And if you have any comments, please leave them in the comments below. And stay tuned. We're going to be putting some other series together as we go along with just, I think, some helpful hints that will help anybody, whether you're a beginner marketer, an intermediate, or you've been doing this for a while. We hope that is valuable for you too.